a wonderful opportunity to be part of this. So exciting. Look, I just want to begin with a welcome to country, and I want to acknowledge the Gundagara and Tarawal people as the traditional custodians of the land where I'm based. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And you might have heard recently that there's a bit of a pushback against the welcome to country. This is one of the things that's being, kind of hijacked by the No Voice campaign. But, I feel such deep gratitude, really, for these awesome people. They protected this country for so long, and I've had the opportunity to enjoy it. So, I'm really honoured to be able to, be part of that ritual of welcome to country. So, in terms of who I am, I just very simply say, my name is BomHyon Sunim, but people generally just call me Sunim, and that's the usual address for Korean monks and nuns. And I ordained first in the Thai tradition and spent a number of years in Thailand before going north to South Korea. And there I took higher ordination in the Buddhist Mahayana tradition, and the Korean Buddhism is a form of what we call Zen in the West. In Korea, we call it Seon, and the word actually comes, well, originally, it comes anyway. The root of it in that part of the world is from China, and it's known as Chan. So Chan is the Chinese word, Son is the Korean word, and Zen is the Japanese word. And Zen has become, really well known in the West because in the 60s, some of the masters, the Zen masters, went to the States when the world was opening up in that way. And so Zen caught the Americans' imagination and really the West's imagination over a number of decades. So for 15 years, I was living and studying and learning in monasteries in Thailand, Korea and Taiwan. And now I've been back in Australia for the last 13 years. So Zen, or Chan or Son, dates back to the 5th century CE, when an Indian master known as Bodhidharma, and some of you may have heard of Bodhidharma, he travelled from India, and in those days, they walked or they travelled on horseback or bullock or whatever, and they used the trading routes, and so he travelled along the Silk Road to China, and he was wanting to share his teaching, which comes from the original Buddha's teaching, but he had made it into a practice, and this was called dhyana. And dhyana is actually the word, the Sanskrit word that translates into Chan, Son, Zen. So he arrived in China with, really full of hope and wanting to offer this teaching and this practice to the Chinese people. But they really didn't get it, and they weren't very interested at that time. There's a whole big story around that, but I don't have time to go into it. And so, it took root in small pockets in China, and was also transmitted to Korea in the 5th century, and then later to Japan, and much later again to Vietnam. And it became most powerful really in the 8th and 9th centuries. So that's probably enough as an introduction. Yes. Well, Chan or Zen or Son actually means meditation. So there you have it in a nutshell. But it doesn't mean that we spend our life sitting on a cushion, although in the training period in monasteries we do a lot of it, I must say. But Zen is actually, and I'll use the word Zen because it's most familiar for people. And Zen is about simplicity. It's about living naturally, mindfully, and Zen meditation is a really core, a foundation of our life and our practice. And it's really it's as simple as breathing, sitting, walking, drinking tea, watching a sunset. It's the mind and body attitude towards doing whatever we're doing that is the bone of meditation in our tradition. And so these are all life practices and rituals, which are the more informal. But in the monastic life, we also do more traditional practices and rituals, and of course the lay people join with us at times. So, like prayer, chanting, bowing, reading sutras. Yeah. Well, it's our life, really. I guess, whereas for people, for people living the life of a householder or, engaged in a lay capacity in the community, often, they will have other big commitments like family, and whether that's, their own generative family, or whether it's, looking after parents or being engaged with siblings or whatever. So the thing with monastics, and of course, people who take the religious path generally well, not so, but certainly in the Catholic Christian tradition, some of the some of us. So we are celibate, which means we don't engage in relationships, sexual relationships. We don't, our life is really available to people, to all people, and most traditionally that's been the community where we're living, the Buddhist community that gathers around the monastery. That's broken down a lot now, particularly with it coming to the West. So, when I came back to Australia, for example, I was living first in the Korean Buddhist temple monastery, and it was finding myself back in Australia, and wanting, and needing really to be engaged in a lot of other things, apart from just being, available to the Korean community where I was living at that time. So there was a bit of tension in that. And I guess because I didn't, I was probably in my, maybe, some mid to, I can't remember, maybe 37 or something when I ordained. And so I had a life before that, a very strong professional life. And so when I came back to Australia, there were people asking me to do things that were drawing on very much, not only on my Buddhist life of 20 plus years, but also on, the skills and the experience bases from my professional life. And so I found that, I've found over the years that I've been back that tends to be, one of the main strands of where I kind of put my energy. I still, of course, engage in teaching in the community and, sometimes, running retreats and still in that sort of way. But there's equally and sometimes more time that I give to the needs really in this country to really bring, Buddhism into the mainstream, and not just as a faith, or, I'm not so interested in promoting, the Buddhism for the sake of Buddhism. I'm interested really in what Buddhism can, the teachings, the philosophy, the practices can contribute to the whole of humankind. So that's where I find it's a little bit different. But generally, as I say, I mean, it's my life. The Mahayana tradition, which is the Northeast Asian tradition of China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Tibet. We have a path that's a little bit different from the Southeast Asian Theravada tradition, and this is the Bodhisattva path. And the Bodhisattva is is known as a being of great compassion, and so the Bodhisattva path was developed as a path of practice and training, and it's not just monastics. Anyone can take that practice path. But as a monastic, when we take our vows or our precepts to make a life commitment, we also take the Bodhisattva vows, and that means that we vow really to come back lifetime after lifetime. So as you probably know, Buddhism has this notion of reincarnation or rebirth. And not so much reincarnation, rebirth, I should say, and so we vow to come back into body, lifetime after lifetime, until all beings are freed of ignorance and suffering. So that's really a very powerful, practice path in itself, and for us as monastics, that's really the core of our presentation to the world. So, someone appears in front of me, and my response is, how can I help you? Yes, well, I suppose, we do formal practice, but really, practice is our life, as I was saying earlier, and we say Zen is not special, which is really saying, meditation in inverted commas is not really that special. I mean, it's about how we take that attitude and that practice into every aspect of our life. And of course, in the early times of Buddhism, and particularly Zen Buddhism in China, Korea, Japan, etc., the monasteries were built in the mountains, and so in nature. And of course, at that time, nature was everywhere. It's not like now, and so these, Zen practitioners would build a little hut by a stream or whatever. And so really nature was our teacher. And it's, it's still very much so in those countries. There are, a lot of that land, of course, has now been claimed or whatever. But in Korea, they made a very wise decision not to allow privatization at all in those mountainous regions. So there's huge swathes of mountain, forest country in Korea, which is, I guess, the equivalent to, it's protected, and so, this area, of course, people can walk, and they do. They come walking, and they can camp. There are places, but really, it's maintained so beautifully in its pristine state. And so, for those of us who are living in that condition, all around us is a teaching. You know, life itself, we say, is a teaching. And when we're in nature in that way, you know, everything around us is a teacher. And so it's, you know, they're places of really deep solitude in a way, and a wildness that's you know, that's really wonderful. It's a, you know, you can't find it very much in a lot of the world now, even in Australia. You know, when I was young, there was much more access. You know, not quite like that, but you know, I used to often, when I was in my 20s, just, you know, put a tent in my car and go off, you know, into sometimes into the national forests. You know, no, I didn't go really so much into the national parks where people were camping all together. I'd find somewhere and I'd just put the tent up and stay for a few days, and you know, just in the middle of nowhere, really, in the wilderness. And it's not so easy to do that anymore for all sorts of reasons. I guess safety is one of them. But you know, apart from, you know, nature as our teacher, you know, the practice is. You know, there is a formal practice of sitting. We say we use the word sitting more so than meditation, although it, you know, really it's you know, it's the equivalence. But I guess sitting implies that again, you know, nothing special. You know, you just bring yourself to the cushion or the chair or whatever, and you just allow yourself, you know, and this is a practice in itself, it's a training in itself, but you know, you begin to allow yourself just to settle, you know, to relax. Really, a lot of meditation is a lot about just relaxing, and not relaxing in the way that we often think in our world about relaxing, which is, you know, kind of lie back and put the feet up and, you know, just it's more about, you know, maintaining a posture. The posture is very important to, you know, just to give us the vehicle to engage with the mind and body in a way that you know, we become an observer, you know, rather than a doer. So it's very much moving away from the I am meditating, I am sitting, I am whatever. It's like, you know, you become, as I say, you know, you become the observer, you become present to, you know, in the sitting, you become present to what's happening at a much deeper level than we usually observe in our mind and body, our sensations, our thoughts, you know, our you know, what's arising in the mind, the constant kind of tapes that go round and round that most often we're not even aware of, you know. And of course these are the things, you know, like these constant, you know, reactive tapes, the, you know, that we haven't really stopped and looked and understood what's going on in our process. We start to become aware of our, you know, of how we hold our body, you know, what we hold in our body, and you know, we start then to go deeper and deeper and to learn, you know, to understand who we are in a much deeper, you know, kind of meaningful way. And as we do that, you know, the stillness in us strengthens, and you know, in this core of our practice becomes stronger, and you know, becomes the core of our being, really. And so over time, you know, we a lot of the, you know, the sort of worldly anxieties and troubles and, fears and these things just fall away. We don't give attention to them. We know that they're there. We note that that's what's happening in our body or in our mind, but we just, we use a technique of being aware of the breath in a particular, point in our body, and in the Korean, and also, in the Korean and the Chinese, Japanese, we use a device which is, an anchoring device for concentrating the breath, and essentially this is a concentrating of all the sort of disparate kind of strands of mentality, bringing them to a single point. And the point that we use is what's called the Tantian, or the Tantian in the Chinese. It's a Chinese word, and it's a point just below the navel. And so we don't, I'm not concentrating on I am breathing. I'm watching, we begin by really noting the rise and fall of the belly. So with the in-breath, the belly rises or expands. With the out-breath, the belly contracts. And so this is, it's a beginning really of a hands-off. So it's not like driving a car. We kind of have to put ourselves in the back seat. We still have to be able to, manage the kind of long-distance steering in a way, but we need to be guided by our deeper, intuitive mind. So being present is really important. But at the same time we're meditating, and we meditate what we call open eye meditation. And I told you a story earlier about Bodhidharma, who came from India. And so one of the things that he brought with that practice was what was then known as wall gazing. And so after he was, kind of disappointed by China's lack of real interest in what he was bringing, he went to, a remote region of China and found a cave, and he spent many years practicing alone in this cave, facing a wall, facing the cave wall. And so we still today, our practice is about facing out. So in the meditation room, for example, we'll be in some kind of a circle or something, and each of us will be facing out of the circle, and our eyes are partly just resting, not closed, not open really, and just resting comfortably on the floor in front of us. So this is what we call open eye meditation. And one of the reasons that we do that is because if you close your eyes when you're meditating, particularly in the early years of training, then there's a good chance that after a while you'll fall into a stupor or a dream state, or and you don't even know. And so the thing about having an open eye meditation is that then my teacher used to say, what colour's the floor? And if you can't see the floor's yellow, then you've gone off into a daydream. So it's a way of, again, maintaining alertness and really just maintaining alertness in body, alertness in mind. And I guess that's the formal practice. Along with that, we cultivate, Zen is about cultivating inner freedom. And, it's about allowing spaciousness. And this is not just Zen, many meditation practices are the same. Allowing space in the head and in the heart. And the heart is really, really important. in our practice, because most of the time in life we spend up around, our attention is really up around the head level. And we're unaware of the body, really. We're just caught in the head. And of course, in this time of so much import, in terms of, particularly now with the digital import, we just get absolutely bombarded from everywhere, not just the digital, but all the commercialism around us. And, something is always, as much faster than we can even know, is pulling on our attention through our senses. And, we get so overwhelmed, really. And I'm at the university here in Sydney, and, and I'm doing some research with young people, and I'm also doing some teaching. And, I see, and they talk to me about the level of anxiety and, and fear and, just discomfort that they experience in every moment of their life, and of course we see, the rising rates of mental health issues. And a lot of that is just, it's really to do with this absolute overwhelming overload. And so meditation is so important, some form of, doesn't have to be a big deal, it can be simple. It can be as simple as just finding somewhere comfortable to sit. You don't just sit cross-legged on the floor, but just taking some time out, when you need it, and hopefully eventually building it in as a preventative practice rather than, a recovery practice. But, just taking some time out, sitting, and just becoming aware of the breath. Taking your attention down to that point just below the belly button, the dantian, and just letting yourself settle there, and gradually start to notice the rise and the fall of your belly in the breathing in, rising, breathing out, contracting. And this in itself will start to, to bring you into a calmness. I want to tell you a little story about, in my young life, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, or the particular incident I'm going to tell you about was actually in my early 20s. And, I had some very significant mental health issues, which, I won't go into the story, but, the main story. But anyway, I struggled. And I was, it was a really challenging time for me. And I went into psych institutions, and, I was on psych medications at times, and all this sort of carry on. And then at one stage, I was also working at that time in a domestic violence refuge. And that was the beginning, really, of that movement. And something terrible happened. We had two women with their families staying with us at that time. And both of these women had a teenage daughter. And these girls were, 15, 16. Anyway, I won't go into the long story, but what happened was, one time I was living in a two-story place, and I had the top unit, and then another one of the collective that I worked with at that place had the underneath flat, and she'd given that flat for the evening to these young women, to give them a little bit of space away from the refuge. And anyway, they were a bit wild, and they were drinking and lots of and I could hear them, loud voices and stuff. And I got a little bit anxious, but I just thought, no, it's I need not to interfere. And then then it got really loud and angry. And anyway, what happened was one of the young women stabbed the other woman to death. Now, that just absolutely rocked me. That, completely, I was catatonic. And, it had such a profound effect at the deepest part of me. And I guess also, because, there was a history of some instability. And anyway, so I ended up back in a psych institution, and I just got worse, really. It didn't work. And then a friend came and said to me, look, why don't you try something really different? And I was desperate. So at that time there was I don't know whether you know of Satchidananda. Satchidananda was setting up ashrams at that time. Satchidananda is a guru, or was a guru, from India, from the Hindu tradition, but this development of a Satchidananda tradition and practice. So he'd come to Australia and decided it was a good place to set up an ashram, and he so this friend of mine said, look, why don't you go and stay in the community for a little while? And so I thought, well, yeah. So I went to the ashram, and the Swamiji, as he was called, the Indian, particular Indian guru that was there at that time, that was looking, really the main teacher and manager of the place. And he said to me, look, just, be free for now. Nothing special, nothing, don't worry too much about anything. So every day in the morning I went to, there was a beautiful river running through this property. The property is still there, still operating as an ashram, but it's much more swanky these days. It was very basic when we were there. But so I'd go to the river and I'd sit by the river and I would just sob. I would cry, I would wail, just sobbed for day after day after day after day. And, gradually I could feel, myself calming and lightening in body, in mind. And eventually, the weeping stopped. And, it was at the same time as this Swamiji called me up again. And I hadn't really seen him. I'd sort of been part of the community in the sense that I would eat with them and try when I was able to do some of the yoga and meditation, but I couldn't always do it. I just wasn't in that state. And so the Swamiji called me again and he said, look, I really want you to go and do some work, because everyone had a job. And so I would go down to this pit. They were making mud bricks to build, accommodation, a mud brick accommodation. And so I was given the job. So there was a big, pool of water, and it was mud, really, like a mud pit. And so my job was to, with bare feet, go into this mud pit and just stomp around in the mud. And, that was all I had to do. And they would gradually, I wasn't the only one. There was always two of us in the pit. But, they would introduce, bring some straw and, whatever else to, that constituted the material to make mud bricks. And this was just absolutely sublime. You cannot believe, we have this expression, excuse me, a pig in shit. It was like that. It was just so grounding for me. Here I was, just all I needed to do was just do this. And of course, feet in the earth, connecting, grounding, had a really profound effect on me. And, and so I actually stayed with that community for maybe 2 or 3 more months. But what I learnt from that experience and what I knew about myself was that meditation was a go-to for me in all sorts of ways. So not just sitting on the cushion, as I said before, but, understanding how to, what's the word, my words disappear sometimes these days, but to bring myself into that, into body, into mind, and, to let go, to let this anxiety, this stress, this fear, this tension, this craziness, let it just be until it just dissolved. And so Zen is a perfect vehicle for that, because, walking on the mountains, drinking tea, doing calligraphy, watching a sunset, we use this way of being that's really nothing special in as much as we can in every moment of our day and of our activity. So that's a little story for you. Yes, well, of course, that's really a big part of our practice. But I just want to say too that, Zen is very playful in many ways, and creative, and Zen is very famous for its poetry, including haiku, which some of you may have heard of, and I'm actually leading a haiku teaching, I think, next month, because it's something again that draws on the Zen meditative, being present style, and also we use a form of support for practice, called koans or kongans, which are like paradoxical riddles, that the teacher will tell us a bit of a story and ask us a question, and it's a riddle that hits the mind, and it challenges our logical reasoning, which is what Zen is really all about. It's to take us into that deeper intuitive part of ourselves, to awaken the deeper wisdom within ourselves. And one of the sort of idea of a koan that probably most of you have heard about is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And so if you try to answer that from a rational perspective, you'll make a mistake. So it's not about, answering from the head. It's taking it in deeply into the whole of, body, mind, and, an answer over time will just spontaneously arise in you. So they're the kinds of variations of practice, but of course in, from the earliest times in relation to your question about, social justice, ethical behaviour, community engagement, really from the earliest times, the Buddha was very socially minded and socially engaged. He was, strongly supportive of women, and and he also was very much against animal sacrifice. That was a common practice among the Hindu communities at that time. Of course, everyone in India was a Hindu at that time. So, and Buddha himself, of course, was born into a Hindu family, and he taught all his disciples and followers to respect all living beings, and and I guess ethical, the ethical precepts that we live by are really common sense again in a compassionate world, and it's not many of the the first environmental activists in the last 70 years were and are Buddhists, and many of them Zen Buddhists. And so social action has been really a core, a really core part of my life from as far back as I can remember. Even as a child, I had this, this kind of awareness and sense of unfairness and rightness and unrightness, and so I was very much an activist in my late teens, early 20s, and really continued to be so. It's very important. Zen, in a way, Zen, it's always challenged mainstream life, with the attachments to materialism and, to human ego advancement. And, that's probably one of the reasons why, the early practitioners of Zen went to the mountains, chose to live simply in nature, often alone with very few possessions, because possessions can weigh very heavy on the mind. And so, it's about living simply. It's about, living not for our own gain, but, for the freedom, the liberation of all human beings and all beings, really. Some of the earliest and most influential environmental activists in Zen Buddhists are Joanna Macy, you may have heard of, David Suzuki, Thich Nhat Hanh, I'm sure many of you have heard of, and David Loy. And so, we're following a very rich tradition, and several of us who are Australian-born monastics, we engage in this way. And one of the things, that I find myself engaged in many different contexts of my life at present is really speaking out for Australia to embrace a greater diversity of culture, of gender, a greater diversity of faith representation, to move away from this old colonial stance of, white is right. And so that's in all the different places that I'm engaged, that's really a common, kind of a pathway of action. I'm not so much out in the streets anymore. I spent a time doing that when I was younger. I'm enormously busy, so I don't find a lot of time to do it. But, if it was important, I would go to the street again. I find that some of the laws that are being made now that are, protecting developers and corporations and things. I mean, I think that if that becomes untenable, then, I will go to the street again, because it is so important that we cultivate, that human part of us, that we understand that we're all interconnected. We're not separate. We can't last a moment. There is no such thing as a separate being. We are all interconnected and interdependent. So when we're out there promoting other people's rights, really, that's for our own benefit as well.